Welcome to the Consummate Athlete podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete podcast. Peter, how's it going?
Well, I'm being told it's Christmas Eve, so I guess maybe I'm having some nog, and I wish the same for you and your family.
Since when do you drink nog?
I don't know, but I'll stick with the nog and the wishes, the well wishes.
Okay, yeah, I mean, maybe we can keep the well wishes, but I would love to see you chugging eggnog. Although, you know what? I'm going to say I'm still so upset that I cannot find soy nog anywhere. Now it's all like
okay, well, I got a Christmas
nog.
Gift idea.
You're not going to find it.
Okay, well, we'll see. I have a week, but not really because this is in the future, so it's actually Christmas Eve. But we are here. We have a few questions to put out. So in line with us being consistent and keeping our podcast episodes coming in on Tuesday, we are dropping this on Christmas Eve. And again, we are thankful for you being here whenever it is that you are here and for being here with us throughout the year. So thanks to all the listeners and to our sponsors over the year and all the supporters and athletes and everyone else who's listening and along for the ride. We appreciate you and all your participation. So yeah, we do wish that you have a great holiday season.
Yes, and if you want to get us a present, you could definitely just head over and rate and review the podcast on Apple, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. We would so appreciate it. That would really be the best present for us.
For sure.
And we have a link to how to do that over on our Instagram at Consummate Athlete. We'd also take a follow over there. But anyway, let's get right into it, because you know what? A lot of people are probably listening to this as they panic wrap Christmas presents or are panic driving to the nearest whatever store to.
Well, or maybe it's Boxing Day and for our UK and certainly
true.
Canadian friends. I know in the US they're wondering what we're talking about probably. There might be sales on Amazon though, so maybe you're clicking through our links on the show notes onto your Amazon page and helping us out in that way.
Yeah. But anyway, we'll keep this episode short and sweet-ish, or as short and sweet as we can ever go. Probably this question deserves an entire book. In fact, I'm pretty sure there are many books on this topic.
Many long episodes of podcasts.
Many long episodes.
Which we will link to a few podcasts. If I forget to say that during the thing, we will try and link to a few of these mentioned podcasts.
Yeah. So the question is, what exactly is Zone 2? And this person said they'd love to know what Molly and Peter's when in doubt rule/statement is with respect to Zone 2 training. This is a really good question. It's one that's been, a very hot topic in both the sport and the longevity world in the last few years. I would say almost to the point where it's become almost problematic that it's such a hot topic for discussion, because I think then everyone gets so very into the weeds about what exactly counts as endurance training versus zone 1 recovery, easy training versus tempo versus sweet spot. And I think people get a little bit too stressy about it, to be honest.
Sure.
So let's maybe start with, how do you look at zone 2, Peter? How do you define it?
Yeah, so specific to me, I really just sort of use, for athletes I work with, it's under 75% of max heart rate. Is that correct for everyone? No, it's absolutely not. And how did you pick max heart rate? There's a lot of variables and errors there. Now, by training, we figure those errors out, right? Some people are, a lot of the women I work with, especially ones who are, very, very endurance, these are beasts of endurance performance. Sure, the heart rate's going to be higher, especially when they're in season and they've been doing these big, long workouts and races. But it's, not so high, and it becomes evident over time. And certainly we can cross-reference to a few different things, which we can get into in this episode of what you might cross-reference that to. But I really like just this simple concept of, what's this heart rate like? And then, what's that feel like? And then we can also cross-reference to, like I say, to power and a few other things as well to sort of figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. I almost think of it as, I'm going to blank on who said the quote, but it's I don't know how to define pornography, but I can tell you when I see it.
Oh, well, so Greg Lehman talks about that with how much does form matter in running, or when someone's doing a squat, and it's sort of this pornographic rule or whatever you say is if it looks so bad that any person would look at that squat and be like, that seems really dangerous, versus when we nitpick, oh, that person's right knee caved in a tiny bit. Greg would say that that's probably not an issue, assuming they're achieving the performance goals and not having pain that's affecting their training, versus the someone who's throwing their head around and doing really odd things with their both knees and all different directions or something.
Yeah. So to me, I think of zone 2 as like, I can't quite tell you what it is necessarily or like the exact feeling, but I can definitely tell you when I'm running with someone who is no longer in zone 2.
Yeah. Well, what would those be? I guess, what are those pornographic signs?
Okay, we might need to rephrase.
So, like, is there cleavage or what do you do?
That is not a thing.
Revealing, outfits?
Well, actually, you know what? That might, in a weird way, you might not be totally off when you said that.
Right.
Offensive, maybe, but relatively accurate, I think, actually. Like, there is the, heavier breathing. And I mean, this can totally happen. I know I tend to be a louder breather, but I can also tell if I'm shifting to a heavier breathing than just my normal, like loud breathing.
Yeah.
But to your cleavage point, I think it's when you're out on a run and it's, say 30, 40 degrees, and you suddenly notice that, the people around you not only are like huffing and puffing a little more, but also are doing things like taking off their gloves, unzipping their jacket a little bit, like are starting to significantly overheat when previously they were completely like reasonably dressed. And granted, like temperature changes during the day. It might just be that it's getting warmer out.
Sure.
But I would say overheating can also be a sign that you're starting to work your way up to getting into that, what do you want to call it, like a zone 2.5?
Yeah, let's just call it. So, I guess that's like a central, I like this idea of like, what is it not? There's maybe like a Venn diagram where we could all agree, like, as you say, like pornographic, like that is too much. And probably most people would believe, some people will say, oh, but the lactate or the VO2 or something. But if we sort of said, what is it not? Well, huffing and puffing where you can't talk at all. We could disagree about the talk test and the nose breathing. Your coach, David Roche, I've heard him talk about the talk test. He doesn't really think is that good. And I don't want to misrepresent his opinions on it, but I think I'm actually on his page that some people just maybe breathe a bit more or mouth breathe a bit more or whatever. And it's just a bit more audible. And I think we have to accept that different bodies are going to solve a problem, right, differently.
For sure. I know so many people that can talk even when they're completely maxed out.
Mm-hmm. And they run beside you for 5 hours and the whole time you can hear them breathing. So then the question would be, if they persist or endure that entire 5 hours, there's no way that it was, certainly approaching anaerobic threshold or whatever you want to call that, the zone, second threshold, where we're becoming like zone 5, over whatever that threshold is. So with this zone 2, where we're looking at aerobic threshold, that's what zone 2 is. Usually the top of that zone 2 is going to be something around that aerobic threshold, or what you might call like all day pace. This is where lactate is pretty controlled. Certainly you'd see most of these things like power and heart rate are all not drifting, assuming that we're not in a very hot environment or there's other environmental or fueling things. So there's very stable performance. So that would be things that we might agree on, is if someone's, able to do it and they're training consistently, then this would be a sign that probably that's okay, right? If they're like more like a 78%, probably. I often point out that what I don't like to see, and I think most people would agree, if you look at a Peter Attia thing, they're often talking about riding on an indoor trainer for fitness or longevity or whatever they're calling it, versus like a cycling and a performance situation. But if you listen to the Peter Attia podcast with Pogača, and he's asking him a lot about what's your zone 2 heart rate and what's your zone 2 power, and like just really like, sort of like really getting into what this amazing athlete does. And Pogača said he would love to go and do big, long zone 2s, but he lives in the mountains. So like he can't really do it very well. So then you have to think, well, why? Well, it's because he's going to coast a bunch, right? And so he only has 6-minute climbs at the pace he goes up things. So he doesn't do that much. So then you're like, oh, wow, okay, I thought he only did that. That was the rumor that we're like, oh, Pogača's so fast because he only does zone 2. And then it became this like thing everyone got so into because Pogača only does zone 2. But then you actually ask them what he does. He does do a lot, no doubt. But you have to be careful, right? Because it does depend a bit on terrain. So then you'll see people saying, oh, I was doing zone 2 in my group ride. Well, no, you were coasting and then you were surging and there's all this stuff going on. Or I was doing zone 2 in a mountain bike ride. And it's like, well, no, you were surging and then you were coasting. You weren't even pedaling.
So that's the danger of looking at averages versus...
Or just saying zone 2. Sometimes I don't think there's even that much like, just it could be like that was an easier mountain mountain bike ride, but that's a mountain bike ride. I think that's a different thing. Whereas with zone 2, it tends to be very steady when we say that. And certainly like the power, the heart rate, there can't be big surges and then big periods of resting in that. That's not really the idea.
Yeah. And to kind of add to the Pogača point, so I actually got to interview Inigo San Milan, who is also on the Peter Attia podcast. We'll link to that one too.
His coach.
He's Pogača's coach. He's also like the guy for zone 2. But the nuance that often gets missed that I talked to him about is, and actually it was a really fun conversation. I'm so sad.
He's really neat. Yeah. I like, for as far as like scientists and stuff go, he's like very animated and very funny and I think very practical too, is why I like him. Yeah.
And I'm so upset that we couldn't actually use the conversation on the podcast, because when I talked to him, he was actually at a training camp with Pogača, and he was calling during a rainstorm from the follow car. Yeah. So the quality of the call was absolute trash, but the actual quality.
What he was saying was great, but the quality of the connection, the audio
was not good. Yeah. But anyway, he was kind of laughing about it. He's like, Pogača's zone 2 is most people's, like power wise, is most people's zone 5. So Pogača, when he's riding at zone 2, can ride at zone 2 for very long periods of time. He can climb the freaking Alpe d'Huez in zone 2 because his zone 2 is so freaking high. So when we try to apply that to, anyone who's riding a bike normally, any master cyclist, I include myself in this, I include you in this, Peter, like any of us riding around where we're in any kind of area that has any kind of elevation gain, any kind of like tougher gravel section, whatever, we're going to go above our zone 2. Like, unless we're getting bikes that are geared for our area to like never let us go over a certain thing. I don't know.
Sure. Like, no, that's exactly it. And so the most obvious way that you could present this to someone is you start trying to run and then try and stay under 75%, or we could use the Maffetone, which is what I love about all this stuff, is like it all overlaps. Joe Friel has the exact same thing. Phil Maffetone has the exact same thing. They all describe it slightly differently, but if you put it in a chart or tried them all out for yourself, you'd be like, oh, this is all endurance training. Okay. So the idea is like, you just don't go that hard and you stay under this and you try and be steady, right? So we love the Maffetone test. I use that in the testing and training of athletes a lot. And what is it? It's you ride for 30 minutes, you warm up gradually, and then you ride for 30 minutes under whatever you're going to call zone 2 or MAF heart rate, or under 75%, or under Joe Friel's, 30 beats under threshold. They're all the exact same, plus or minus. And then you see what is the power, the speed, the distance covered, while you're staying under that heart rate. So what is the performance under that heart rate? And so what we see with that is that if you are a runner, it's the most obvious, because most people cannot run under that. Again, pick that, take your age, 180 minus your age. This is just very rough, but this is like the easiest if you don't know you don't know your max heart rate, you don't know your threshold heart rate. So we're going to go 180 minus your age and then go try and run. And most people will not be able to do that, right? Or they'll start running and then find that they have to start walking as they fade at that, right? And this is related to a few different things with running, but it sort of drives home what you're saying. Most people, we could take the same thing and say, go ride up a hill that is gravel on your bicycle, and it's instantly going to be 200 watts. So many people cannot do that, right? So it is sort of like a troubling thing of like, well, what do you do? Well, now we have route choice. Maybe we use the indoor trainer, but you certainly can't go and do it on a hilly terrain, because as you say, you'll be over it the whole time going up, and then you'll be coasting the whole time down. So you'll never spend time in the zone 2.
Which makes zone 2 training on the bike actually pretty freaking tricky, especially if you're, a little newer, a little less fitness. Right. Even just like a little older, where your heart rate does, the 180 minus your age, like
sure,
at some point it's going to catch up with you.
And people, so it's usually my 60 plus clients and 50 plus clients who get furious about the MAF heart rate. So you don't have to use the MAF heart rate. We can figure out a more accurate or different. And I have many, I always talk about John Barnes, who's 50 years my senior, but a tremendous racer.
He's not 50 years.
Sorry, he is 50. So 10 years my senior. And his max heart rate's, it might be 10 beats higher than mine. And, he's just a tremendous competitor. So it's just, there is individuality, but that MAF heart rate I love, because it's often very quick, because it's or close, because it's a population-based thing. But certainly there's going to be outliers, and certainly outliers when we have fairly healthy, endurance athletes and otherwise, right? Like these people are sort of like that. So all that said, you should still be able to operate at those heart rates. And we do know that heart rate does decrease as you age. So like that does work fairly well.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've mentioned heart rate a whole lot. And what you haven't mentioned is power. So the one thing that I've talked about in articles, including this one where I mentioned I talked to Inigo San Milan, often with zone 2, like in the zones above zone 2, we're really looking more at power, but zone 2, zone 1, I think you actually want to look more at your heart rate, even if you have power zones for like, you'll have power numbers for those zones. But I think in those cases, like it's actually better to pay attention to heart rate than it is to pay attention to the power numbers.
Right. And so what I like to see with the athletes I work with, we're going to triangulate, the max heart rate. We're going to triangulate the threshold heart rate usually. So the heart rate you hold during like your cyclocross race or your 30-minute effort or whatever, right? We have sort of that value too. And that gives us zones based off of threshold. So I like to cross-reference those. And then we also have, as you say, power zones, which is like, I like the Andy Kogan ones. And so we use those. And so we should see like how much do those, when you ride at your zone 2 heart rate, are you in your zone 2 power? This isn't true for everyone. And that's what that MAF test is trying to show you is it, and can we build the heart rate up so that you actually almost start seeing the power come up above where we would, into even that zone 3 power or the top of zone 2 power. And all we're saying is that you're pushing more power at what we have set as your zone 2 heart rate and power, right? So you might have to even adjust the zones once we do that, but that would be the goal. And so I think someone could say, Andy Kogan would just not even look at heart rate probably and would just say, go train steady in your zone 2, and he would be upset if you coasted a bunch and if you were surging, because that was the objective, was to spend time in the zone 2 power. So I'm pretty indifferent. I tend to go more by the heart rate feeling, partially because I'm a mountain biker and we don't often have as much power, that's changing. But I think that Andy Kogan strategy, or the power-based strategy, I have no problem with that. I think, again, you would find that over the course of a year, it would be almost identical if we were all agreeing that you should pedal steady. Some rides should be flat in zone 2. Some should be vigorous and zone 4, 5, 6, whatever. I think we would have the exact same athlete at the end of the year if we just went and trained. So this is where you should just pick something, learn what your zones are, and then go and do it. And that's what I often with runners, again, sometimes it's just more obvious. Everyone tries to run at whatever, 4.5 minute Ks, and what is that? 7.5 to 8.5 minute miles. No one is that fit. There are people that are certainly more fit than that and that fit, but most people are not, right? If they went and ran a 10K or whatever they wanted to design their zones based and pick whatever zone, calculator you want on the internet, plug in what you can actually run for 10K or whatever you're going to base it off of, and then look at what the zone 2. So these are the max you should be running. It's going to give you, most people are going to be over 5.5 minute Ks, which is like 8.5 plus minute miles, based on how fast you can actually run. So what we'll say your actual threshold is.
Yeah. And I mean, running is even harder because like when you talk about pace, I actually really dislike talking about pace for any of that, where it's like, oh, go, so it'd be akin to power. So like, okay, go out and ride at zone 2 power for X number of hours. You say, go out and run 8:30s for, 10 miles or whatever. The problem with that is unless you're doing it on a treadmill and like have the thing set, it's impossible. Like, it's such a dumb thing because no matter where you are, unless you are on a flat with no stoplights as far as the eye can see, which might be why I run a lot on the Georgian Trail.
Right.
But even then, like there are, trails I take and little hills I run up and people I'm like running around.
And maybe should be doing. This is where our one metric guides us to do weird things. It's like you're a trail runner, but you just run on flat pavement all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Or around a track so that you normalize for wind. And this is why I prefer heart rate and time versus prescribing based off of distance and pace or distance and power. Is because we don't want to get anchored to things like that. There might be workouts in the week where it's like, Molly, you need to go to like fast pavement or a track and hit 5-minute miles during your strides or whatever the workout is you're doing. Or for the cyclist, like it might be, yes, pavement climbs going this fast, like this VAM, like this vertical climbing speed, or this power going uphill, and it needs to be very steady in these zones 5 or 4 or over an anaerobic threshold. But this is where we need to be a little more variable, and it can't just be zone 2 every day as the answer, which isn't necessarily what anyone's saying, but you can see how people are like, Pogacar does zone 2, I do zone 2, but I do it on my mountain bike and on my group ride and on Zwift. Zwift races, and okay, and you breathe really hard and as you say, sweat vigorously. So yeah, I think that's the idea, is that it's you pick the system, and I always try and push athletes, like, don't take my word for it. Go and read the Joe Friel book. Go and read the Phil Maffetone book. Go and read the Andy Kogan book. Go and read everything Atia's put out from Inigo San Millan, and like do the thing. Go and do the plan for a few months and see what happens. See what you learn, right? Use something like that MAF test to assess it, and see what you learn, right? I don't think you're ever going to go wrong if you're actually doing zone 2. That's the challenge I always give people every fall, is what if you just for 2 months did zone 2, or we could call it endurance training, and then see. I think most people, this is the challenge I always give, is that I think you would find you actually like really enjoyed the sport and are actually really healthy and doing really well. But most people won't do the challenge, right? They need to go do the Zwift or the Strava effort or the whatever.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when your Garmin beeps, there's a Strava segment. What are you supposed to do? For the love of God. I mean, come on.
That guy attacked me on the road.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, big concepts. Most of our training should be easy. We always reference the TED Talk by Steven Seiler, the no pain, no gain, the myth thereof. And it's just this idea that you don't have to be suffering all the time.
Okay, so I do actually want to pause there and say we've talked a lot about going out of zone 2 up into zone 3. But what about going from zone 2 down into zone 1? Because this actually, I would say, is almost more, it's the problem I struggle with. I tend to run based on perceived exertion, not heart rate. So it's a little questionable which zone I'm ever in. But I would say like my tendency would definitely be to err on the easier side. And there's, plenty of cyclists who would also fall into that.
So I like lament. Molly has to deal with a lot of lamenting and moroseness from me. But if you talk to Steven Seiler, his studies often will do actually a 3-zone system. So I don't want to confuse people, because this gets super confusing when we start talking about zones. But when you say zone 2, you have to be careful, because a lot of studies and a lot of physiologists such as Steven Seiler would use a 3-zone system, which actually just doesn't deal. It's just under aerobic threshold is zone 1. So easy, zone 1. Okay. Then we get into moderate, which for the cyclists in the room, or the 5-zone, 6-zone, 7-zone people, these are the tempo, sweet spot, threshold zones. So between aerobic and anaerobic threshold, roughly. The physiologists are very mad at me, but this is the rough idea.
I was going to say, there's some like lactate threshold experts out there just shrieking. Yeah.
So zone 2 in a 3-zone model is moderate. And then everything above anaerobic threshold, so this is zone 5, 6, 7, however many zones you have, everything where you're working very, very hard is zone 3. So 3-zone system. So I've been, but I like lament to Molly is like, I don't know why I just don't use the 3-zone system, because it's so simple. It makes so much sense. Those two demarcations are pretty relatively clear. Again, physiologists are mad at me and calling me an ass, but it's something we can sort of agree on, that there's sort of like this all day pace where it becomes moderate. And then there's this some sort of threshold, anaerobic threshold, functional threshold power, something in there somewhere in that area where it becomes extreme or like severe, or some of these words they use where it becomes like VO2 max training versus moderate training.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So to your point,
in that case, zone 1 and zone 2 in a typical like 7-zone system are both zone 1 in a 3-zone system.
Correct. Yeah. So just everything under aerobic threshold is good. Just go move for an extended period. And I like that. And that's the way when I say zone 2 training, I really just mean under aerobic threshold, like easy, low intensity. So if it's a 3-hour, don't go over whatever that heart rate limit or power limit is, or both of those potentially. Keep it easy, keep steady. We said steady was important, and just finish the ride. Is the thing. And so if you don't finish the ride, you probably went too hard and you need to adjust your pacing. Maybe we had some of those limits set poorly, or you didn't fuel, and there's some learning to be done. And then that's sort of how I would do it. Yeah. I think, there's some really good writing. It's maybe complex, but the Steve House book, The Uphill Athlete, I really like. They talk a little bit about your beginner athletes and your intermediate athletes. They're going to train at or above. They're going to have a lot of trouble keeping the heart rate under, this aerobic threshold or in zone 1 and 2 in the 5-zone model. As you get more advanced, you actually don't train that, because Pogačar's is like 300 plus watts. So it becomes very muscular, right? And I see this with a few of the fast athletes I do. Even for me, it's very muscular, and I maybe am like 250, 260, 270. It just becomes very muscular to do that. And it's so close, like the middle one zones are so tight to the anaerobic threshold, I think that it gets difficult to train that hard. So then you end up doing more zone 1 training when you become very fit. And so this is, champagne problems of the fit and famous. But that would be the idea, is when you aren't as fit and you need all the, it's a struggle to stay under that limit. We're going to say, in zone 2 in the 5-zone model, then you probably wouldn't do much zone 1 training. That would be like your walking or something, right? Like your other normal activities of daily living. Whereas your extreme athletes, your elite athletes, they would accumulate a ton of time in that zone 1 or lower zone 2, just because of the nature, right? Like you just can't, as Pogačar said in that interview, like you just can't push that power in a lot of situations. You can't go around a city doing 300 watts, right? Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I think that mostly answers it. I would add the end of this question was, is there as much ambiguity in this concept as I'm perceiving, or am I just overthinking it? I think the answer is clearly no, you're not overthinking it. Apparently there is a crapload of ambiguity, given that we just spent 25 minutes trying to break it down. So, yeah. But at the end of the day, you know what? Try the talk test. Just start there.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Okay, before we get into our next question, just a quick shout out, end of the year, one of our favorite sponsors, Payable, the app or add-on that allows you to take payments within a Google form, which sounds like something that you should obviously be able to do, but until Payable came on the scene, you could not. So this is like the most useful add-on on the planet, whether you are a teacher, a coach, a cycling club, you're just trying to sell some t-shirts, you're trying to collect money for donations, you're an athlete trying to, take in sponsorship dollars, you're me trying to sell books in real life, just so many great applications of it. You can head over to payableapps.com or grab the link in our show notes to find out more about them. And with that said, our next question, just to keep the controversial stream going before Christmas. First we're talking zone 2, and Peter has like a bunch of hitmen now that are after him, courtesy of the critical power experts out there who are pissed you didn't even mention them.
Yeah, fair enough.
So now all of the people who have merino jerseys that are currently wearing them are going to come for you too, because our question is, should you do the Festive 500 challenge or any such holiday challenge, really? The most popular of all is obviously the Rafa Festive 500, a challenge that challenges you to do 500 kilometers between Christmas and New Year's, or Christmas Eve and New Year's. Something to that effect. But there's tons of holiday challenges in the wellness fitness world around this time of year. After all, 'tis the season for resolution setting, New Year, New Me coming up. And everyone panicking a little bit about the holiday parties, or being like, ooh, I have a week off work. I should do something crazy. So, is it a good idea?
So we have this post that we've recently updated, and so it includes some of the details about the Festive 500, the original Rafa, which I consider as an outside Festive 500. And then there's the other ones that are now like, everyone, of course, does it indoors, which confuses me a little bit, but I guess I understand where people are coming from. And then we sort of propose this counter one where we suggest maybe 500 minutes of exercise across those days might be a good goal, and maybe some cross training and so forth. So that's that. Is it a good idea for you? Is the question.
I mean, as usual with any expert, I would like to caveat it with, it depends. If you are living in a climate that is conducive to outdoor riding this time of year, you do not have many family commitments preventing you from getting outside and getting on your bike. And, you're not going to be missing Christmas parties. If you are not doing it to punish yourself, I'm using air quotes around punish, for eating quote, too many holiday cookies. In those cases, like, by all means, if it's going to get you out the door, go for it. But if you live somewhere snowy and you're going to have to do all of it inside, and you could instead be outside cross-country skiing or fat biking or, you know, doing something that's maybe more enjoyable to you, but you're going to like grimace it out on the trainer and probably annoy your family in the process because that's a lot of trainer time. It's probably not worth it. In that case, maybe pick a challenge that actually serves you better, or don't pick one at all. I think anytime you're taking on a challenge, you know, from I need to make up for XYZ, I just don't think it's a good idea. Like, I think that's an unhealthy road to be going
like
down.
a head start on the year or something. But what often happens is then people, you know, burn out or don't train in the subsequent weeks. We see this with training camps as well. So I don't know. I would say we are obviously on the, you know, a little unsure about the Festive 500, especially the indoor version. I'm like a little medium on.
And I do think we also have the benefit of like both of us stick to training plans pretty firmly. So it's like we'll hit the 500 minutes of movement pretty easily. And I mean, frankly, if the weather is nice out, like it's very likely that you'll rack up close to that kind of mileage.
I just wouldn't know. I guess that's like the thing is distance is such an odd thing. And so if it's your thing, you know, I have a client going to Florida, they're probably going to do it.
But they'd probably be doing it irregardless.
And so that was sort of their point, but they like the, you know, the thing. And what I like about that is the original challenge. Like, I guess where I'm like, I tend to be polarized on things, I guess, is where it's like the original thing was an outdoor thing with people. So I struggle with the adaptation to the indoor trainer where distance is a construct that we've created. And that's me being a little, you know, I guess, what am I being like, judgmental of indoor training, I guess.
Well, and I'm going to put it out there, privileged in that, like, often, like, we have the ability to go outside and do all of these things. We don't have the family commitments of like young kids that we need to like get to a soccer game. So we can only train in like the worst possible times of day.
I guess what I'm saying is like, I would prefer to see, you know, it's like a TSS challenge indoors or a time, you know, I'm going to log 20 hours between Christmas and it's like I don't know what T would be, Tinseltown 20, and you're going to do 20 hours of training between Christmas and New Year's. I just like, it makes more sense to me from that perspective versus the distance. And I'm sure people would push back that the distance is made realistic and they really simulate it well or something, but I don't know. So I think what I would say is, you know, there's a challenge in doing, if you have a training plan, do it. If you don't have a training plan and this is the challenge and you live for Zwift and stuff, then by all means, like that's your world and go into it and enjoy it. I would say what I suggest athletes to do is, you know, jump into, you know, a race or something like that, but just be careful that some of these things that are distance based, this is that like idea of the metric becoming the target, where now you're not going to go ride with friends. Maybe if it gets really nice outside, you can't do that because now you have to do the Zwift miles and the real miles don't count or something. You know, you're not going to go up a hill. If the fat biking's really good, you're not going to do that. If the skiing's good, are you going to spend time on that, or should you be on your trainer for 3 hours or riding your bike when it's really crummy outside, but then you could be skiing? So this is where the challenge thing I struggle with during the holidays. And we haven't even spoken around the idea of like, you know, are you skipping family stuff? And I get it. Some people want to skip family stuff. And I understand. Sometimes it makes more sense for you and that's fine.
Oh, like I will. So we're doing Christmas with the family on Sunday, or one of the families on Sunday. And like, if you think I'm skipping my run on Sunday, you are sorely mistaken.
Sure. So like that's still an option, and we see you and whatever, do what you got to do, you know, be careful, you know, get the therapy if you need the therapy, but, I don't think that you need a challenge to do that either. You know, those types of people probably have training plans as well. And so you could do the intervals. And so there's this thing where I'm off work and I need to add load, but we do sometimes say like, you know, maybe doing a really good job on your training. Maybe you drive to the fat bike place on a Wednesday and get a 3-hour fat bike ride in, where usually you'd be on the trainer. Right? Like this is stuff that you could do a better job on your training, and it might not read different in the training log or on the Strava, but you've done a super job. The environment's great. Your motivation's great. You fueled great. You sat on the couch before and after the workout to prepare and then to recover.
Or in your car at the trailhead because you didn't want to go home quite yet. Whichever, no judgment.
Yeah, if you just do it there. So I think that's our suggestion and our caution. You know, the post hopefully is positive and provides you with those 3 different options, and certainly the just following the plan is always, you know, Fast Cat Frank's follow the effing plan is always a good rule of thumb. So I think we're okay with it, but you know, pick your path wisely, pick your adventure wisely.
Love it. Okay, with that, happy holidays, everyone. We will be back on December 31st for another episode. As always, thanks so much for tuning in. Do us a favor, rate, review, subscribe, all the things. We appreciate you. And yeah, happy holidays. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.